Dave, we've been asked many times by business owners who needs to be a part of what I'm doing with my exit. There's business brokers. I get approached by M&A or merger and acquisition advisors. My CPA has thrown their hat in the ring because they think I'm ready. Talk a little bit about this. Who needs to be a part of an exit and why are they part of that exit?
Yeah, great question, Drew. I think all of those professionals are really needed. In fact, we always talk to clients about you really need to have a team to go through this process. The challenge, though, that we find is that each one of those professionals, as paramount as they are to the process, they look at things or they tend to look at things in a silo. As an example, an M&A advisor or an investment banker or a business broker is simply focused on maximizing the enterprise value or the sale price for that business. There are several instances where that may not be the most important thing. We're working with a client right now where they actually don't care to get peak valuation. The deal structure is actually the most important piece to them. They have a member of their family that they are wanting to spend more time with. And so they just want a deal structure that allows for them, in particular, to step away from the business as soon or as close to that buyer closing on the transaction as possible. So they're actually willing to accept less cash for the business and not be necessarily tied to a deal structure that makes them stay on for 5 years or having rollover equity. So while that M&A advisor is absolutely needed, just looking at it in a siloed approach without a coordinated effort of understanding how is that deal structure tied to the financial planning goals? How does the tax layer structure into this? What are the legacy goals and charitable giving goals that the client may have? Our role in that relationship is to really to quarterback that team so that decisions aren't necessarily made in just a silo, that they're looked at in all different lenses of the structure of that deal to make sure that the client ultimately has the satisfaction and they're not in the 70% camp of business owners that regret selling their business within the first 12 months of selling it because they didn't necessarily focus on anything other than minimizing tax or maximizing the enterprise value or the sale price of the business when they sold.
Yeah, that's interesting. As clients come to you and they're going through this process and they're realizing that, hey, all these people, when they have a seat at the table, also get paid to have a seat at the table. Do you find that the business owner will start to want to pull some of those people out because of that?
Yeah, sometimes we get asked those questions from clients like, do I really need all these people or particular? Sometimes we hear questions about, what is all this going to cost me in particular? And I think ultimately the way that I sort of look at things is for a lot of the clients that we work with, their business is the most valuable asset on their balance sheet. Most of our clients, over 80% of their net worth is tied up in the closely held assets of the business or the stock of the business. And looking at that business in just one lens, oftentimes they end up leaving money on the table, right? I've been in circumstances with clients where their CPA had brought some very valuable advice to the table where we hadn't known that information. And by knowing that tidbit, that ended up lowering the tax bill by millions of dollars in that example. And so having that team of advisors, even though there may be some excess cost there or extra cost by paying professionals, ends up giving the client the best results. If typically speaking, when they have that team of advisors working together. Another example that I'll give is actually a CPA that we work with often had been brought into a conversation with a client, and ultimately the client ended up replacing his CPA because his CPA that he had for 30 years wasn't used to these types of transactions. And so when we brought in the CPA that we had worked with several other clients, there were so many things that she was aware of in this circumstance to where the client's existing CPA hadn't walked through as many exits with clients before, and they ended up adding a ton more value. And in this client's example, I remember he was saying, well, I already have a CPA. Why do I need to pay somebody different? And this is a great example that I can give to you that really sheds some light on why it makes sense to work with also a team of advisors that has experience in these transitions and exit planning process like ours, because they really understand the nuances and where they can drive that value.
Yeah, and as we work with clients all over the country, you bringing that up reminds me of the client we were working with that was going to sell the business, lived in Boca, but the business operated in New York. It was a stock sale. There's a lot of wrinkles to that. And then the buyers decided they wanted an asset sale, and without calling, just agreed. And then the legal team said, that changes everything from a tax structure. We need to revisit this. Talk a little bit about that experience. That was a huge light bulb that went off for that client, realizing why the team is worth it.
A lot of clients, they don't know the nuances of what's a stock sale, what's an asset sale, why does it even matter if I'm getting a check or a wire transfer for what I think the business is worth. And in this example, the client ended up assuming all of the liability of the company because of this. And that's where the legal team, having that team really throughout the entire process, ended up nipping that in the bud right away to say, hey, no, this isn't going to work. You're going to have all of this liability. They knew also the tax strategies that we were putting in place to where those all would have been mitigated if we went down this path as well. And so having that team where the legal, the tax, the financial planning, and investment advisory all are working in concert together, it's a lot of why we chose the name that we did with our company of Instrumental Wealth. It's like having a conductor of an orchestra. And when everyone's on the same page, it can sound like a thing of beauty when you're listening to live music. If one instrument's off or someone's off rhythm or off beat, it really then screws up the entire performance. And so a lot of times having that team of advisors where everyone is listening or playing to the same sheet of music, everyone's on rhythm, really avoided a potential disaster here with this client.
We've seen this play out many times, and we know that clients walk into our office, they want to talk about exiting, they have their own team. And we add to that team? Do we replace? Talk a little bit about that, because most of our clients have been working with, you mentioned CPA for many years, their own legal team for many years. They may have a buddy at the golf course who brokers businesses. So talk a little bit about that. And what does that look like?
Yeah, that's always really challenging, particularly if they have relationships that they want to work with that maybe aren't equipped or the right people for the team. It's important to reference that our goal is never to replace anyone that's on the team. But ultimately, the sports analogy that we often use is we're trying to win the Super Bowl. And sometimes to win a Super Bowl, you have to assess the team that you currently have. Do they have experience with your size company, with your industry specific? Does your accountant or CPA have experience in dealing with these types of transactions? I remember just recently we were working with a client where their CPA looked at us and said, I've never filled out a gift tax return before. And we're thinking to ourselves, well, gosh, if you've not filled out a gift tax return, have you dealt with this level of complexity? You're selling a $40 million company right now. If you don't have experience doing something as simple as this, is this really the right person? Now, it can be challenging, of course, to have those conversations with clients because a lot of times there's 20, 30-year relationships in place, both for the professional as well as the client. And nobody wants to feel like they're abandoning that relationship or having to have that tough conversation. Or maybe they thought, hey, I want to leave the dance with who I came here with. So if that person is potentially able to stay on the team and help us win the Super Bowl, we absolutely want to keep them. Our goal is never to replace anybody unless we feel like they don't have the expertise to get the deal done.
Yeah, and I think about that because a lot of times, let's just bring in, we talked a lot about tax. So let's bring in tax. If we bring in another CPA, the new CPA has a lot of questions for the previous CPA. How did you file things? What were you doing with this? Going back to quality of earnings. So there, a lot of times they're not replaced. They're an addition to,
That's
because
right.
there's a lot of things they have to look back and ask questions on. Um, in your analogy of winning the Super Bowl, we bring in another receiver. He doesn't even know the routes yet, right? And so that older CPA that's been invested in the company for all those years is still paramount to the deal in that case. I think that brings a lot of clarity to, if I come into one of these interactions, well, the people that have been in the trench with me, growing my business for all these years, are they going to be put to the side, or do I get to bring my team along? So thanks for explaining that, because I think we get that with a lot of clients, that question.
So if you're wondering, do I have the right team in place to walk me through this process? Or do I need an organization like Instrumental Wealth to help quarterback and organize these different siloed approaches? Hop on our website at instrumentalwealth.com, schedule some time with one of our advisors. We'd love to have a deeper conversation with you around this.